2.5 billion years ago, something shifted. The fires of the Archean Eon were cooling. The magma ocean was long gone. The first continents had risen, fragile and dark, above a global iron-rich sea. Life existed, but only barely. Single-celled, microscopic, invisible to any eye that would not evolve for another 2 billion years. And then the Proterozoic began. One word. Translated from the Greek, it means the era of earlier life. But that translation does no justice to what actually unfolded across the next 2 billion years. Because the Proterozoic was not merely earlier life. It was the construction of everything. The assembly of the biological, geological, and chemical machinery without which no complex life could ever have existed. It is the longest era in Earth's history. 2 billion years from start to finish. So vast in its duration that if you compress the entire history of the universe into a single year, the Proterozoic would occupy more than 3 months of it. And yet it remains the least studied, the least understood, and the least celebrated chapter in the story of our planet. This is the era that built the world. The Proterozoic opened in the aftermath of the Great Oxidation event. The cyanobacteria had done their work. The iron sinks of the Archean Ocean had filled. Oxygen was accumulating in the atmosphere for the first time. And this chemical revolution was rewriting the rules of life on Earth. Most of the anaerobic organisms that had dominated the Archean were dying or retreating. They found refuge in the sediments, in the deep ocean, in the interior of other organisms. Their descendants survive today in every anoxic pocket of the modern world, billions of years removed from the catastrophe that ended their dominance. But in their place, something new was rising. The aerobic organisms, cells capable of using oxygen as a fuel. And the energetic advantage they gained from this was not incremental. It was transformational. Aerobic respiration extracts roughly 18 times more energy from the same quantity of food as anaerobic metabolism. 18 times. In the economy of evolution, this is an almost unimaginable competitive advantage. With this energy surplus came possibility. The possibility of larger cells, of more complex internal architecture, of biological machinery that could only be sustained by a cell with abundant energy to burn. And then, in one of the most consequential moments in the history of life, a larger cell engulfed a smaller aerobic bacterium. And instead of digesting it, it kept it. The engulfed bacterium became the mitochondrion, the cellular power plant, the ancient bacterial partnership that today sits inside every one of your cells and inside every cell of every animal, plant, and fungus that has ever existed. This single event, occurring around 1.5 billion years ago in the middle of the Proterozoic, made complex multicellular life biologically possible for the first time. But the Proterozoic was not only a story of biological revolution, it was simultaneously a story of geological transformation on a planetary scale. The early Proterozoic saw the first true supercontinent assembling. Geologists call it Columbia, sometimes Nuna. By 1.8 billion years ago, most of the world's continental crust had been swept together by plate tectonics into a single, enormous landmass. Mountain ranges rose along the collision zones. Vast sedimentary basins formed in the continental interior. The geography of the planet was unlike anything before or since. But supercontinents do not last. The same tectonic forces that build them eventually tear them apart. Columbia fragmented, its pieces drifted, and over hundreds of millions of years, another supercontinent assembled in its place. Rodinia, the supercontinent of the mid-Proterozoic, a landmass that may have been positioned near the equator, its geology still debated, its exact configuration still reconstructed and revised as new data arrives. But its existence is certain, and its eventual breakup would trigger one of the most extreme environmental crises the Earth has ever experienced. As Rodinia fragmented, fresh rock was exposed to the atmosphere. Fresh rock weathers chemically. Weathering consumes carbon dioxide. As carbon dioxide was drawn from the atmosphere by the weathering of Rodinia's breaking margins, the greenhouse effect weakened. Global temperatures dropped. Ice began to form at the poles and spread toward the equator. And spread. And spread. By approximately 720 million years ago, the Earth entered a glaciation so extreme that ice sheets may have reached all the way to the equatorial oceans. The planet became, in the most literal sense, a snowball Earth. Glaciers ground across what had been tropical seas. Ice kilometers thick covered most of the planetary surface. For tens of millions of years, the Earth was the most hostile environment it had been since the Hadean. How life survived is still debated. Perhaps in thin liquid films at the equatorial ocean surface where the ice was thinnest. Perhaps in hydrothermal environments deep on the ocean floor where volcanic heat maintained liquid water. Perhaps in pockets of ice-covered ocean where light still penetrated barely enough to sustain photosynthesis. But survive it did. And when the snowball Earth ended, as volcanic carbon dioxide slowly rebuilt the greenhouse effect over millions of years, the world that emerged was fundamentally different from the one that had entered the ice. The oceans were altered in their chemistry. The nutrients released by the melting of billions of tons of glacial sediment fertilized the post-glacial seas. And into these newly rich, newly oxygenated, newly dynamic oceans, life erupted. Not the simple microbial life of the early Proterozoic. Something far more complex. The eukaryotic cells that had spent hundreds of millions of years slowly diversifying, slowly accumulating genetic complexity, slowly experimenting with multicellular associations, now faced a world rich in nutrients and oxygen. And they responded. The Ediacaran period, the final chapter of the Proterozoic, beginning around 635 million years ago, produced the most astonishing biological transformation the Earth had seen. The first complex multicellular animals. Not mere colonies of identical cells, but organisms with different tissues performing different functions. Bodies. Architectures of life that had never existed before anywhere on the planet. Dickinsonia. A flat oval organism up to 1.4 meters in length, its ribbed surface pressed against Ediacaran seafloors in thin impressions preserved for over 500 million years. What was exactly remains debated. Whether it was an animal in the modern sense of fungus, a lost experiment in multicellularity, scientists still argue. But it was complex, it was large, and it was alive. Charnia, a frond-like organism anchored to the seafloor and extending upward into the water column, its body a branching series of segments arranged in a distinctive herringbone pattern. Found in the rocks of Charnwood Forest in England, in Newfoundland, in Australia. The first complex organism ever discovered in rocks older than the Cambrian. Its identification overturned a century of scientific consensus that complex life could not predate the Cambrian explosion. Cloudina, a small tubular organism that built itself a mineralized shell. The first evidence of biomineralization in the fossil record. The first organism to construct a hard structure from the minerals of the surrounding ocean. A precursor, however distant, to every shell, every bone, every tooth, every skeleton that life would go on to build. The Ediacaran world was a global experiment. The seafloors of the late Proterozoic were gardens of strange and diverse organisms, none of them exactly like anything alive today, all of them representing evolutionary explorations of what multicellular complexity could mean. Most of those experiments would end at the Cambrian boundary. The Ediacaran organisms left no direct descendants in the modern world. They were the first draft of complex life, written and then erased, replaced by the more familiar architecture of the Cambrian explosion that followed. But they mattered, because they proved that complex multicellular life was possible, that cells could cooperate, that bodies could exist. Through all of this, the chemistry of the atmosphere continued to shift. Oxygen levels rose and fell across the Proterozoic in fluctuations that still challenge interpretation. The oceans were not uniformly oxygenated. Deep water may have remained anoxic even as the shallow surface waters became oxygen-rich. The chemistry was heterogeneous, patchy, dynamic. And through all of this, the continents continued their slow, restless movement. Plate tectonics operated throughout the Proterozoic much as it does today, perhaps slightly faster in the early part of the era when the mantle was still marginally hotter. Cratons collided. Mountain belts rose and eroded. Sedimentary basins filled and emptied. The geological work of building a planet continued without pause across 2 billion years. The Proterozoic left its fingerprints everywhere in the modern world. The ancient cratons that form the stable cores of every continent today were assembled largely during the Proterozoic. The banded iron formations that we mine today for steel were deposited during the early Proterozoic as the Great Oxidation event played out. The phosphate deposits that fertilize modern agriculture were concentrated during Proterozoic sedimentary events. The copper, zinc, and lead deposits that underpin modern industrial civilization were emplaced in Proterozoic sedimentary basins. We mine the Proterozoic every day. We build with its rocks. We fertilize our crops with its chemistry. We carry its mitochondria in every cell of our bodies. And yet most people have never heard its name. 2 billion years. A span of time so immense that it contains within it the origin of all complex life, the assembly and destruction of multiple supercontinents, the most extreme glaciation in Earth's history, and the first appearance of animals on Earth. All of it unwitnessed. All of it leaving its record only in the rocks and the molecules and the chemistry of the world we now inhabit. The Proterozoic did not merely precede the world we know. It constructed it. Every mountain range you have ever seen traces its tectonic origins to Proterozoic plate movements. Every cell in your body runs on Proterozoic chemistry. Every breath you take is sustained by an atmosphere whose oxygen balance was established during the Proterozoic's long chemical negotiations between life and rock and sea. The 2-billion-year age of mystery built the world in silence, and we are still learning to read what it wrote.